Back to the Land, in its simplest definition, describes a movement of people from urban city-dwelling life to the rural countryside. In general, the Back to the Landers sought out a simple lifestyle away from the materialistic, dominant city culture. Despite these definitions, the movement was more complicated than it may seem. Donna Brown, in her book Back to the Land, The Enduring Dream of Self-Sufficiency in Modern America, provides a further explanation for why Back to the Landers moved out of the city. Many viewed this movement as a way to meet the challenges of the modern era politically, economically, and socially. Not everyone moved from the city for the same reasons. According to Jared Phillips in Hillbillies and Hillbillies, there were three groups of people associated with this Back to the Land movement. There was the general counterculture, which was often described as hippies, what Phillips would describe as the disenchanted youth drawn to the area by its promise of traditional livelihoods, and the urban escapists. However, despite their reasons for moving, the demographic among these three groups were quite similar. Kate Dallows describes in her novel, We Are as Gods, the demographic that consisted mostly of 20-year-olds who were white, from middle-class families, and well-educated. In fact, about 70% of migrants had some sort of undergraduate degree from a university. Because of their previous urban lifestyles, many of them did not have any carpentry or farming experience. To directly quote a Back to the Lander interviewed by Dr. Jared Phillips, they didn't know shit. Nevertheless, they left their homes in the city with optimism and traveled across the country longing for new community. This flood of people from the cities to the countryside began at the end of the 1960s and continued well into the 1980s. Based on information from the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, almost 1 million people within the United States participated in this movement, migrating mostly to the Northwest and Western states. More specifically, between 2,000 and 6,000 people moved to the Ozarks of Arkansas, creating a population of growth of 18.9% from 1968 to 1982. By 1980, the population had exceeded 2 million people. In the Northwest region of Arkansas, the population had grown by 40.6% and 32% in the White River region. Without this flood of people during the Back to the Land movement, the Ozarks of Arkansas might not be the thriving area that it is today.
When it comes to education, the Back to the Land community has many different opinions. The first generation of Back to the Landers were college educated, and Lisa Gruel-Spicer of Western Washington University writes that knowing how to research written materials helped the first generation acquire some knowledge needed for successful rural living. The Back to the Landers are very community-based, so they shared their intellectual resources with each other. Being educated made them aware of alternative visions for humanities. This influenced the establishment of communes, which are not common anymore, but back then communes were important with raising children. Kate Dolas explained in an interview regarding the release of her book that the first generation of Back to the Landers believed if you were college educated or you were on the track to be college educated, they were pretty confident that you could find a good job, so they weren't worried about walking away from that track and then going back to it later. Today, some families encourage a college education while others think you do not need an education to work in the fields. Ultimately, family is very important to the Back to the Land community, so most families will be supportive of the child's decision. When asked if the community trusts doctors or modern medicine, Dr. Phillips elaborated that they would rather do things themselves if they can, but they wouldn't endanger the life of someone. He also gave the example that they won't hire a vet if they can just birth the cow themselves. Emily Matchar writes in her article about the community's use of alternative medicine. While no specific examples were given, she explained that they want to live simply and sustainably, so if they could take care of someone through natural methods, they would try. Dr. Phillips could not think of any distinct cultural gestures that would set them apart from other groups, but they do have defining characteristics of the way they dress. As stated before, their goal is to live simply and sustainably, so reusing clothes by buying from thrift stores and exchanging hand-me-downs are very common practices. Since they value being able to support themselves, many people wear clothes that are suitable for work on a farm. Dr. Phillips said they can sometimes be set apart non-verbally. He joked that many have Bernie Sanders stickers on the back of their cars. He also said that Back to the Landers approach problems differently from others. They think of things in a more holistic and long-term sense.
According to the Dallas article, Back to the Landers reformed the progressive scene entirely, with young progressives moving into red states. According to Dr. Phillips in his on-campus interview in December 2018, Back to the Land communication comes from the generational and holistic perspective. In talking about community or membership, Back to the Landers don't just mean people. Community more respectfully includes the land and the animals in the region. In the 60s and 70s, words like organic and natural food were not commonplace, but were then reclaimed by the previous generation of Back to the Landers and are now seen regularly on food labels. Some Back to the Landers are motivated to denuclearize family, while others remain nuclear. Back to the Landers commonly rely on fictive kinship within the community, where farming friends are known as aunt and uncle instead of Mrs. and Mr. Family relationships are defined by the natural world. Quote, "If you can't redefine family to include the natural world, then there's no way that you can actually live a meaningful life," end quote, as nature defines reality. In the Hippie Family Values movie trailer, the commune redefined family to include everyone around them. In his 2016 article, Hillbillies and Hillbillies, Phillips records that the Back to the Landers were driven to the Ozarks to create a more perfect world. He also mentioned in his interview that while they desire to change the dominant culture, they don't mind being a part of it, especially since members of the dominant culture have the money to buy Back to the Lander made products, which are more expensive than parallel products found in stores. Jacob's book notes their aspiration to return to the land came from the desire to escape the mainstream consumer culture. Phillips also provided a critique of the dominant culture, saying that even though most Back to the Landers are politically progressive, most of the progressive world freely makes fun of rural spaces and the agricultural community at will.
According to the War Eagle Mill website, every fall a large craft fair is put on exhibiting handmade products from artisans nationally and locally. Many members of the local Back to the Land movement can be seen here as either a vendor or as a customer supporting their fellow Back to the Landers.
Like one of my friends, his farm, he and his partner's farm, it's a round the table farm. The whole idea is we're going to come together. We may not agree on anything. We can agree on food. We can agree to sit down and be civil. And that's what we're going to do. And that's huge. That taking the time, because if you think about it, the production and consumption of food for us is not just like we're going to show up and eat food. It's we cook together and then we eat. We'll bring some things, but then we also cook together and we eat and we take joy in that and consciously try to make our if you're like me that skews to the relying more on the hard work side of it. It's a moment to make me slow down, but it's also a moment to have the whole community come together and enjoy the fruits of all of our labor, right? And enjoy the fruits of this the fact that no one of us can produce all of that together. It takes all of us to do it, all of us to build this community. And that's a huge lesson. It's a really powerful lesson.
According to Dr. Jared Phillips in his lecture Hillbillies, A Deep Revolution in the Arkansas Ozarks, the people of the Back to the Land movement have numerous values and functions for work. The counterculture serves as a way to bring joy back to American culture and is also a call to remember that we are all humans living in a natural place that can dictate how we live. Large groups of people transplanted themselves into the Ozarks as a way to preserve the natural land. After the Vietnam War, there was a large surplus of war materials, and Agent Orange was being disposed of in largely natural, unpopulated areas such as the Ozarks. Back to the Landers began to move into the Ozarks to protest this disposal of Agent Orange throughout the Ozarks. According to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, Back to the Landers also worked to not only better their own lives, but to also better the lives of Native Ozarkers. They began non-governmental organizations focused on assisting rural and small farming populations with educational programs, revitalization of Arkansas history, jobs, and the framework for a movement towards local food. The Encyclopedia of Arkansas also states that locals naturally met the mass migration warily, but violence and contempt were rarely seen. Many of the members of the agrarian Amish and Mennonite societies in the Ozarks are large food producers. They produce products such as jam that are then sold at farmers markets and craft fairs around Arkansas. The Northwest Arkansas Kind Foods blog tells that the Ozark Mountain Jams Company is owned by a Mennonite family in Madison County, and all of their jams, jellies, syrups, and butters are hand-poured and open kettle cooked. Not only are their products delicious, but they are also locally made from the Ozarks. In an interview with Dr. Jared Phillips, he emphasizes the importance of eating meals together with individual families and also as a community. By sharing the fruits of each other's labors, they can develop a sense of unity within their community with everyone's contributions. He also notes that they try to remain rooted in their heritage by growing heritage breeds of plants and livestock. He continues to describe the media's portrayal as terribly inaccurate. They are often misquoted and portrayed as strange hippies that grow marijuana and are involved with drugs without any desire to actually accurately understand and portray their movement. The members of Back to the Land would like the public to understand their true intentions and desire for a better, healthier society.
Back to the Landers place a strong emphasis between the connection of people and the land. This subcultural group is often seen as hippies, but according to an article published in the Rolling Stone magazine, they are actually just forward-thinking rebels who are passionately committed to the progressive and social change. This same article believes that this movement gave way to current forward thinkers such as Bernie Sanders. In the 1970s, the Liberty Union Party came to be heavily sponsored by Bernie Sanders and his supporters. This party was an anti-war and progressivist party, and their main goal was to shape and change the current social establishment. Because Back to the Landers are so heavily reliant on communities, this movement took off, and we are still seeing the traces of it today. In a book published by Orwin and Drake called Back to the Land, they state that they are typically heavily revolved in self-sustainability and practice environmentally friendly ways of living. In our interview with Dr. Phillips, we learned about the differences between the older and the current generations of Back to the Landers. In previous years, we would see them as dirty hippies who just ran around in communes naked. However, now we tend to see them as strong agriculturalists and farmers in community co-ops. Because their strong ties to the land, community, and food, they give them their own unique and individual cultural perceptions that sets them apart from the main establishment.
But for us, the answer really is back to that. We don't necessarily voting for presidents and voting for senators, whatever, is really important. And we all do it, and and we're very vocal in these things, and we campaign for people and whatever. But we also believe that change, that macro change, is important. But maybe the more important change is at a micro level, at that community level, at that person-to-person, watershed, bioregional level, because that's like when you rebuild those communities, and if there's pockets of us across the country that are doing that, then it takes time. It works on a generational scale, but then you create a revolution, right? You create a really truly lasting revolution.